Evans approached the coach with a determined expression, ready to discuss his terms. Standing confidently, he said, "I need to make one thing clear before anything else. I want to set my price, and once I step onto the field, you must honor that amount and pay me accordingly. This is the condition I bring to the table, and I need your assurance before we proceed." The full story. In a cruel, unforgiving city filled with inequality and hardship, there lived a man named Evans. His family, though honest and hard-working, was confined to the ranks of the second class, scraping by on the barest of means. Despite the struggles surrounding him, Evans stood as a beacon of hope, not just for his family, but for the entire city. Evans wasn't just a footballer. He was the footballer, the undisputed star of the local league. His talent was unparalleled. His movements on the pitch like poetry in motion. No match in the city was complete without him, and no team dared to take the field unless Evans was in their lineup. His speed, precision, and game sense had earned him a reputation as a once-in-a-generation player. With every victory, Evans became a lifeline for his family. The money he earned from local matches turned him into the breadwinner, allowing his parents and siblings to breathe a little easier. Yet, Evans knew that the city's limited opportunities would never allow him to fulfill his true potential. Stories of England buzzed in his ears, like the distant roar of a crowd, rumors of lush green fields, grand stadiums, and leagues that treated even black players like stars. They said that the pay there could change a man's life, that a talent like Evans could shine even under the scrutinizing gaze of a foreign land. The dream was too big, too alluring to ignore. With a mixture of hope and resolve, Evans made a decision that would change the trajectory of his life. He told his family of his plan to leave the city and journey to England, where he would seek a chance to play for a professional team. It wasn't just ambition that drove him, it was necessity. Evans wanted more than survival for his family. He wanted prosperity, a chance to rise above the chains that bound them. But the road ahead was anything but easy. England was a world away, and Evans knew the journey would test every ounce of his courage. He was venturing into the unknown, leaving behind everything familiar, and stepping into a country where prejudice often clouded the brilliance of players like him. Yet, Evans was ready to face it all, for his family, for his dreams, and for the chance to prove that even the harshest beginnings couldn't stop him from reaching greatness. As Evans packed his few belongings and said goodbye to his family, the weight of their hopes rested on his shoulders. He wasn't just leaving to chase a dream, he was leaving to rewrite their story. As soon as Evans arrived in England, he wasted no time settling into a modest, weathered apartment on the outskirts of the city. The flat was far from luxurious, a small, cramped space with creaking floors and a persistent chill that seemed to seep into his bones. But to Evans, it was a stepping stone, a temporary haven, as he set his sights on the grand dream that had brought him here. For 2 long, grueling months, Evans scoured the football world in England, knocking on doors, attending tryouts, and chasing whispers of opportunities. The rejections piled up, and the once unshakable confidence he carried from home began to waver. Still, he pressed on, driven by sheer determination. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a glimmer of hope appeared. A semi-professional team, Tola FC, had heard of his search. Their coach, Mr. Matthew, was stern, but fair man with a reputation for spotting raw talent, sent word inviting Evans to the training grounds for an interview. The invitation ignited a fire in Evans. He remembered who he was. Back home, he was unstoppable, untouchable. Why should this be any different? The day of the meeting arrived, and Evans strode onto the field with his head held high, his boots polished to a shine. His confidence bordered on arrogance, a remnant of the accolades and glory he had left behind. Mr. Matthew greeted him warmly, extending a hand in a gesture of respect. "Welcome, Evans James," the coach said with a small smile. Evans nodded curtly, shaking his hand, but skipping any pleasantries. "Thank you, let's get to it," he began. "If you want me on your team, let's talk numbers. I'll name my price, and you'll pay me what I'm worth." The boldness in his voice lingered in the air, heavy and unyielding. Mr. Matthew raised an eyebrow, his smile faltering slightly. He had seen players like this before, young, hungry, and full of themselves. Pride could either be a player's greatest strength or their downfall. "Before we talk about payments," the coach said evenly, "we need to see you on the pitch. Show us your skills, and we'll see if you're a fit for Tola FC. Evans frowned, his pride stung. "Do you know who I am? Back home, I was the player. Teams wouldn't even take the field without me. I don't need to prove myself to you. I've already proven everything I need to." The coach's calm demeanor didn't falter, though there was now a sharper edge to his tone. "Here in England, it's not about who you are back home. It's about who you are here. Every player on my team has earned their place, and I won't make exceptions, not even for you. If you want to play, you show me what you've got." Evans bristled. His pride, built on years of being hailed as the best, refused to let him back down. "I don't need this," he snapped, turning on his heel. "You'll regret this when you hear about my success elsewhere." With that, he stormed off the field, leaving Mr. Matthew behind. The coach stood there for a moment, watching the fiery young man disappear in the distance. He shook his head, neither angry nor disappointed, and muttered to himself, "Talent without humility is a flame that burns out quickly." Back in his office, Mr. Matthew filed away Evans' name. Part of him knew the young man might return one day, humbled by the harsh reality of professional football. But for now, he would let Evans walk away, knowing the journey ahead would teach him far more than any coach ever could. One Saturday afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Evans found himself at a nearby training field, kicking a ball around with his neighbours. The game was light-hearted and casual, just the kind of fun he needed to forget the frustration of his search for a team. As the ball sailed through the air, he was lost in the rhythm of the game, his mind distracted from everything but the simple joy of playing. Suddenly, a voice called out from the sidelines, interrupting his thoughts. "Hey, you, the one with the ball." Evans slowed to a stop, eyes narrowing as he glanced toward the voice. Standing there was a man in a tracksuit, his posture firm, his eyes focused with the kind of intensity that made Evans' heart skip a beat. "Who are you?" Evans asked, irritation creeping into his voice. He wasn't used to being interrupted during his downtime, especially not by someone he didn't recognize. The man smiled, unfazed by Evans' curt tone. "Name's Mr. Francis. I'm the head coach of Terrace FC." Evans raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. Terrace FC was one of the more well-known teams in the region. Though not the top-tier giants, they had a reputation for paying well and treating their players right. Terrace FC, Evans echoed, still sizing him up. "What do you want with me?" Mr. Francis's smile widened. "I've been watching you play," he said, gesturing toward the field. "You've got something special, something that doesn't go unnoticed. I'm here for a little relaxation, but after seeing your skills, I couldn't just walk away without talking to you. How would you like to come join our training session in 2 days? I think you could really fit in with our squad." Evans felt a familiar surge of pride. The compliment was flattering, but it wasn't enough to sway him from his usual stance. "Look," he said, his voice dripping with confidence, "if you want me to join your training, I'll need to name my price. And before I step foot on that field, you'll need to pay me that amount up front, no exceptions." Mr. Francis blinked in surprise, clearly taken aback. He studied Evans, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. "You've got talent, no doubt," the coach said, shaking his head slightly. "But let me be clear, your pride is blinding you. Terrace FC is the highest-paying team in all of England. Our contracts are solid, and our players are treated well. But what you're asking, it's not how we do things. Evans locked eyes with the coach, a defiant fire burning in his gaze. His confidence, once unwavering, now teetered on the edge of arrogance. "Tell me how much you're offering," he said, his voice firm, his posture unshaken. "If you can match my price, I'll play, otherwise, I'll walk." Mr. Francis stared at him, his brow furrowing. He was used to negotiating with players, but Evans was different, too full of himself, too convinced of his own worth. He had no doubt the young man could play, but he also knew that pride could destroy talent faster than any opponent ever could. "All right," Mr. Francis said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "You think you're worth whatever price you're demanding. But trust me when I say, in this game, it's not about how much you ask for, it's about what you prove on the field. And right now, all you've proven is that you've got a long way to go, not just as a player, but as a man." Evans didn't flinch. "Then I guess we're done here," he said, his voice cold. Without another word, he turned and walked away, the sound of his boots crunching on the gravel the only noise breaking the tension between them. Mr. Francis stood in stunned silence, watching as Evans walked off the field, his pride and arrogance trailing behind him like a shadow. He had expected a conversation, a negotiation, even a little resistance, but this was something else entirely. With a heavy sigh, Mr. Francis shook his head. "He's got the skill," he muttered to himself. "But he doesn't yet understand the game." Evans didn't look back. The ball was still in his court, but he didn't realize that in football, as in life, there was more to success than just showing up and demanding your worth. And in the world of Terrace FC, talent would only take him so far. 5 months later, the once confident Evans sat in his cramped, weathered apartment, the weight of failure pressing down on him, a suffocating fog. It had been 5 long months since he arrived in England, chasing dreams of football stardom, but reality had been harsh. His search for a club had been met with rejection after rejection, and the arrogance he once carried so proudly had withered under the crushing burden of hunger and hopelessness. Single meal a day, and the dream that once burned brightly now flickered faintly in the back of his mind. One dreary afternoon, as rain pattered against the window, his phone buzzed on the rickety table beside him. Picking it up, Evans saw a number from home, his heart clenched. Calls from home rarely carried good news these days. He answered cautiously, pressing the phone to his ear. "Evans." His mother's trembling voice came through the line, cracking with desperation. "Your father, he's very sick. The doctors say we need 5 million naira immediately, or we may lose him." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. 5 million, he whispered, his voice weak. His mind raced as the line went dead. How could he possibly find that kind of money? He couldn't even afford to feed himself properly. Evans stared at the phone in his hand, lost in thought, as despair began to claw at him. 2 weeks passed, and things only grew worse. One evening, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was his girlfriend, Happiness, calling from Nigeria. For a moment, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she had some comforting words, something to ease the growing pressure in his chest. But her voice was sharp, almost impatient. "Evans, I need money to pay my school fees," she said bluntly. Evans closed his eyes, the pressure mounting. "Happiness," he began hesitantly, "please, give me some time. I'm doing my best to raise the money, but things are hard here." Her tone turned icy. "Time, Evans. Do you know what people are saying? How do you expect me to explain to my friends that my boyfriend, who went abroad, can't even afford to pay my fees? I don't date poor men, Evans. If you can't give me the money, I'm leaving you." Before he could respond, the call disconnected. Evans sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words adding to the already overwhelming burden. His father's life hung in the balance, and now the woman he thought loved him had turned her back on him. Desperation gnawed at him, and he made a decision born of sheer necessity. The next morning, He returned to Tola FC, swallowing his pride as he requested an audience with Coach Matthew. The receptionist glanced at him skeptically, but allowed him in. When Evans stepped into the office, Coach Matthew looked up from his desk, his sharp eyes narrowing as he studied the young man. "You look familiar," the coach said, leaning back in his chair. "Haven't we met before?" Evans nodded quickly, his heart pounding. "Yes, sir. My name is Evans James. I came to you 5 months ago." The coach's expression darkened as recognition dawned. "Ah, I remember now. You're the one who wanted to dictate terms before even proving yourself. What do you want this time, Evans? I don't recall having an appointment with you." Evans hesitated, then fell to his knees, his voice breaking as he spoke. "Please, sir, I was wrong. I realize now how arrogant I was. I made a mistake, but I need this opportunity. I'll work harder than anyone else on your team. Just give me a chance, and I'll prove my worth to you." Coach Matthew's face hardened, his tone cold and unyielding. "You had your chance, Evans. You threw it away. Do you think groveling will change anything? I told you before here, talent isn't enough. It's about character, discipline, and respect. And from what I've seen, you lack all three." Evans's heart sank as the coach leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Before I count to 3, get out of my office. 1, 2. Without waiting for the third count, Evans stumbled to his feet and left, shame burning in his chest. The rejection stung, but the truth in the coach's words cut deeper. Back in his apartment, he sat in silence, replaying the events of the past 5 months in his mind. His arrogance had cost him everything. As he stared at the ceiling, he remembered the day he had stormed out on Coach Francis of Terrace FC, his pride blinding him to the opportunity in front of him. He realized now that his own hubris had been his downfall. 2 days later, it was a chilly morning, the kind that made every breath visible in the air. Evans jogged along a quieter state road, the rhythmic sound of his sneakers against the pavement, keeping time with his racing thoughts. He was determined to find a way to approach Betty Francis, the daughter of the Terrace FC coach, Mr. Francis. He hadn't told anyone about his plan, but he knew this might be his only shot to mend the mess he had made. As Evans rounded a corner, he noticed a young woman walking ahead, carrying a bag of groceries. She stumbled suddenly, the bag slipping from her hands as its contents scattered across the ground. Without hesitation, Evans sprinted toward her. "Careful," he said, catching her just as she was about to fall. The woman steadied herself, looking up at him with wide, startled eyes. For a moment, she seemed frozen, her gaze locking onto his face. Evans, with his sharp features and confident presence, had a way of leaving people momentarily speechless. She blinked, a faint blush creeping across her cheeks. "Thank you," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not a problem," Evans replied with a warm smile, crouching to gather the fallen items. "Are you okay?" "Yes, I'm fine," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'm just a little clumsy sometimes. I'm Betty, by the way, Betty Francis." Evans froze mid-reach, his heart skipping a beat. He couldn't believe his luck. Of all people, he had just helped the very person he had been hoping to meet. Regaining his composure, he stood and extended a hand. "I'm Evans James," he said smoothly, "a Nigerian who's trying to find his place here in England." Betty shook his hand, her lips curving into a smile. "Nice to meet you, Evans. What brings you here?" "I came to England to pursue my dream of playing professional football," he said, choosing his words carefully. He didn't want to overwhelm her with his struggles, not yet, at least. "It's been challenging, but I'm not giving up." Betty's eyes lit up with interest. "Football, huh? That's exciting. My father's a football coach, actually." Evans feigned surprise, not wanting to reveal that he already knew. "Really? That's incredible. Which team does he coach?" "Terrace FC," Betty replied, pride evident in her voice. one of the top teams in England. Evans felt a surge of adrenaline, but kept his expression neutral. "That's impressive," he said. "I've heard a lot about Terrace FC. Your father must be an amazing coach." Betty beamed. "He is. It's not easy to impress him, though. He has high standards, I can imagine," Evans said, trying to mask the nerves creeping up on him. He quickly shifted the conversation. "How about we grab some coffee? It's the least I can do after almost letting you fall." Betty laughed softly. "All right, I know a great place nearby." At the coffee shop, the two of them settled into a cozy cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Evans ordered 2 cups, and they sat in a corner booth, the warm light casting a soft glow over their faces. Betty was as easy to talk to as she was beautiful. She exuded a warmth and kindness that put Evans at ease. They shared stories about their lives. Betty talked about growing up as a daughter of a famous coach, while Evans shared tales of his childhood in Nigeria and his struggles to adapt to life in England. He deliberately avoided mentioning his prior encounter with her father. He didn't want to risk ruining the moment or coming across as desperate. "You've had quite the journey," Betty said, her green eyes filled with admiration. "It must take a lot of courage to leave everything behind and chase your dreams in a foreign country." "It's been tough," Evans admitted, his voice tinged with emotion. "But I believe it'll be worth it in the end. You just have to keep pushing, right?" "Right," Betty agreed, smiling warmly. "With your determination, I'm sure you'll find your way." Evans couldn't help but feel a sense of comfort in her words. For the first time in a long while, he felt like someone genuinely believed in him. As the conversation wound down, Betty glanced at the time and sighed. "I should probably get going. My father has a team meeting later, and he'll wonder where I've been." Evans stood and offered her a sincere smile. "Thank you for today, Betty. I really needed this. Thank you for catching me," she teased lightly. "And for the coffee, I'm glad we met." "So am I," Evans said, his heart beating a little faster. "Take care, Betty." "You too, Evans," she said, giving him one last smile before walking out of the cafe. That evening, as Evans returned to his apartment, he felt a flicker of hope. Betty hadn't just been kind to him, she had given him a reason to believe that a door could still open. He didn't know what would come of their meeting, but for the first time in months, he felt like he was back in the game. Evans paced his small apartment, his thoughts consumed by his father's worsening condition. The money for the hospital treatment was far beyond his means, and time was running out. Late one evening, during a long phone call with Betty, he finally confided in her. "Betty," he said, his voice cracking, "my father is in critical condition back home, and the hospital is demanding money I don't have. I don't know what to do anymore." Betty's heart ached at the pain in his voice. Without hesitation, she replied, "Evans, why didn't you tell me sooner? I'll talk to my father about this." The following day, Betty approached her father, Coach Francis, with a mix of caution and urgency. "Dad," she began, "I need your help. There's someone very important to me, and his father is gravely ill. He needs money for the treatment." Coach Francis, known for his stern demeanor, listened intently. After asking a few questions, he eventually agreed. That same evening, the money was sent to Evans. Overwhelmed by the gesture, Evans called Betty. "I don't know how to thank you. You've saved my father's life." "Just promise me one thing," Betty said gently. "Come to my birthday party in 2 days. There's someone I want you to meet." The day of Betty's birthday arrived with much fanfare. Her family estate was alive with laughter, music, and the hum of conversation. Evans, though nervous, wore a sharp blue shirt on black jeans Betty had chosen for him. He looked every bit the gentleman, but inside, he was riddled with unease. Betty was radiant in a yellow dress that sparkled under the lights. As soon as she spotted Evans in the crowd, her face lit up. She made her way to him, her smile bright. "You came," she said, her voice warm. "I wouldn't miss it," Evans replied, though his voice carried a hint of trepidation. He knew this evening wasn't just about celebrating Betty, it was also a test. Betty had told him she planned to introduce him to her father, and Evans couldn't shake the fear of how Coach Francis would react. As the night wound down, Betty finally led Evans to the sitting room, where her parents were waiting. "Wait here," she said softly. "I'll go bring my father." Evans sat, his heart pounding, the opulence of the room only making him feel more out of place. Moments later, Betty returned with her parents. Her father, Coach Francis, froze as soon as he set eyes on Evans. His sharp gaze narrowed, and his expression darkened. "You," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "I know you." Evans stood, his chest tightening. "Yes, sir," he replied cautiously. "We met about a year ago, on the field. You spoke to me after a match." Coach Francis's expression shifted to one of disbelief, then anger. "I remember you now. You're the arrogant young man who dismissed me, thinking you were too good for Terrace FC, and now you dare sit in my house, courting my daughter." "Dad, please," Betty interjected, stepping between them. "Evans has changed. He's not the same person he was back then." Coach Francis shook his head, his voice rising. "Betty, I won't allow this. This man is arrogant, disrespectful, and unworthy of you. I cannot let my only daughter throw her life away on someone like him." Evans opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. The room was suffocating, and the weight of Coach Francis's disapproval crushed him. Betty's eyes filled with tears as her father stormed out of the room, leaving her and Evans standing in silence. 2 months later, life in England became unbearable for Evans. Rejected by clubs, out of money, and unable to support himself, he was evicted from his apartment. The little cash he had left was spent on food, but even that wasn't enough to sustain him. Eventually, the authorities deported him back to Nigeria. As he boarded the plane, Evans felt the crushing weight of his failure. He had left his homeland with dreams of greatness, but now he returned empty-handed, with nothing to show for his time abroad. When he stepped off the plane, the man who had once been a celebrated local football star was unrecognizable. His proud stride was gone, replaced by a weary shuffle. People who had once cheered his name had barely recognized him. He had lost his dreams, his love, and even his self-respect. Back at his family's modest home, Evans stared at the cracked ceiling, haunted by memories of the opportunities he had squandered. On the table lay an old newspaper, the headline reading, "Terrace FC wins championship under Coach Francis." Evans clenched his fists, anger and regret boiling within him. Now, sitting alone, he could only wonder if there was any hope left for him or his story was destined to end in bitter failure. Hi everyone. If you've learned a valuable lesson from this story, there's more where that came from. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell to enjoy more inspiring, lesson-filled stories.